Galw'r cynulliad cenedlaethol I drefn ar eitem gyntaf yn agenda ni y prynawn yma yw cwestiynau i'r Prif Weinidog. A'r cwestiwn cyntaf, Llyr Griffith.
Diolch Llywydd. Pa asesiad yma'r Prif Weinidog wedi wneud o effaith cae banciau ar fusnesau Cymru?
Wel, mae mater masnachol i'r banciau yw penderfyniadau am gau henne. Ni'n cydnabod wrth gwrs yr effaith negyddol mae hwn yn gallu gael ar fusnesau lleol. Ni'n croesawu'r adolygiad diweddar gan yr athro Griggs sydd wedi gwneud argymhellion ynghylch gwella'r ffordd mae banciau'n ymgysylltu â chymunedau.
Wel, diolch I chi am eich ateb. I ni yn gwybod wrth gwrs bod adroddiad yr FSB ym mis Hydref yn dangos yn glir yr effaith mae'n cael y busnesau bach, enghraifft busnesau'n gorfod cau yn gynt a colli busnes oherwydd bod rhaid teithio'n bellach I fancio'r arian. A mae'r British Bankers Association hefyd wedi dangos yn glir fod benthycau busnesau mewn ardaloedd lle mae canghennau wedi cau yn disgyn yn sylweddol. Felly, chi wedi cyfeirio at yr adroddiad wrth gwrs o'ch chi'n sôn amdano fe'n chateb, fallwch chi ymelaethu felly beth yn union I chi'n mynd I wneud fel Llywodraeth, a pa drafodaethau I chi wedi cael gyda'r banciau felly er mwyn edrych ar fodelau amgen o gadw gwasanaethau yn rhai o'r trefi yma sydd wedi colli canghennau?
Wel, wrth gwrs, un o'r pethau ni wedi wneud yw sicrhau bod yna arian ar gael I swyddfeydd post, yn wedi gryno yn yr ardaloedd gwledig, er mwyn bod nhw gallu sicrhau bod y gwasanaethau sydd ar gael ar hyn o bryd gan fanciau yn cael ei barhau ganddyn nhw, sef yr enghraifft talu mewn checiau, tynnu arian allan, ond byddwn ni'n gweud wrth y banciau, mae'n bwysig dros ben I sicrhau lle mae busnesau yn defnyddio'r banciau ar hyn o bryd I ddod I arengleision mewn i'r banc bod na adnoddau ar gael yn y dyfodol mwyn gadw ni'n wneud hynny, falle mewn swyddfa post neu mewn rhyw ffordd arall sydd yn gyfleus i'r busnesau hynny.
Hannah Blythin.
Diolch, Llywydd. In the past few weeks, two major banks have closed branches in the past few months, two major banks have closed branches in Delyn, HSB in Flint and Barclays in Holywell, with NatWest now being the latest to announce they're closing a branch in Holywell as well. And whilst I recognise the steps these banks have taken to ensure that personal banking customers can access their accounts within the post office, in many areas the future of these post offices are far from certain as well. And on Friday last week, I was discussing this in Sweeney Ted, the barbers in Holywell. I can confirm people have only walked out with their hair cut. The problems created by this other bank closure and the specific impact perhaps on rural communities and those businesses that have to travel further with substantial amounts of money. So I'm sure you, First Minister, share my concern and other members on the impact of these branch closures. And I'd like to ask what Welsh Government advice and support is available for small businesses and town centres that are impacted by such closures.
Well, it comes down to ensuring that the post office is able to deliver the kind of banking services that businesses would expect. The nature of banking has changed over the years. Fewer and fewer people visit banks. What is absolutely crucial is that people have the facility to withdraw cash. People have the facility to deposit cheques and cash into a financial institution, and also, of course, that small businesses are able to deposit cash at the end of the day when their businesses close. It's hugely important that where banks leave communities, the post office is able to do that, therefore providing a continuity of service. And that's why, of course, we provided financial support to post offices over the years to make sure that communities do have their post offices that can deliver a wide range of services.
Paul Davies.
Diolch Llywydd. Prif Weinidog, felly bod chi'n ymwybodol fod Banc Lloyds yn cynnig I gau tair cangen yn fy etholaeth I, a Llywydd dyle fi ddatgan diddordeb yn y cwestiwn hyn fel cynweithwyr o Banc Lloyds. Nawr, nid yn unig mae cau'r canghennau yma yn fy etholaeth I yn gwbl anghymesur ar nifer sy'n cau ar lefel Brydeinig, ond maent yn hanfodol I lawer o bobl sy'n byw yn ac o gwmpas y cymunedau hynny, ac felly bydd eu cau yn cael effaith ddinistriol. Dwi'n derbyn taw mater masnachol gan y banc yw hyn, ond yn dilyn mlaen ar y cwestiynau blaenorol, pa gefnogaeth penodol gall Llywodraeth Cymru gynnig i'r cymunedau hyn, a beth gall Llywodraeth Cymru wneud I helpu I liniaru yn erbyn effeithiau negyddol y bydd cau'r canghennau hyn yn cael ar gymunedau?
Wy'n deall bod trefdraeth Abergwaun ac Aberdegleddau mynd I gael, mae'n cyllu I gau nhw. Be sy'n holl bwysig yw bod y gwasanaethau sydd ar gael ar hyn o bryd trwy'r banciau ar gael mewn ffordd arall os mae'r canghennau'n cau. Mae hwnna'n meddwl gweithio trwy'r swyddfa post mwyn sicrhau bod y gwasanaethau ar gael trwy'r swyddfa post. Mae hwnna wrth gwrs yn sicrhau bod y gwasanaeth ar gael I fod lleol, ac wrth gwrs yn sicrhau bod yna mwy o fasnach a gwaith i'r swyddfa post, ei helpu'r swyddfa post I gadw I fynd hefyd. Ond beth bydd ni ddim eisiau gweld, a mae hwn yn rhywbeth wrth gwrs ni wedi sicrhau sydd ddim wedi digwydd yn yr ardaloedd gwledig yn enwedig yw gweld swydd a post yn cael hefyd a felly y gwasanaeth yn cael ei golli yn gyfan gwbl mewn cymuned. Bydd hwnna'n rhywbeth byddwn ddim eisiau gweld, a dyna pam wrth gwrs ni wedi bod yn cefnogi nhw'n ariannol.
Cwestiwn 2, Neil McAvoy.
Diolch Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on Section 68 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004?
Yes, it enables Welsh Ministers to revoke a development plan if requested to do so by a local authority.
Okay. Thanks, First Minister. Well, last week you described this as a nonsense. It clearly isn't. So first of all, will you accept that you were wrong last week? And I'll repose the question that I asked last week. Will you support in this chamber saving Cardiff Greenfield sites by voting to revoke the LDP?
Well, those are matters for Cardiff Council. Unfortunately, he didn't listen to my answer. Last week he said that the Assembly had the power to revoke local development plans. That is not true. It's Welsh Ministers who have that power. In the original legislation in 2004, the Assembly was mentioned, but of course those powers were transferred to the Executive after the Government of Wales Act 2006. So again, as I said, there is no vote on the floor of this Assembly. It's a matter for a local authority to make an application to revoke its local development plan, and it's then for Welsh Ministers to consider and not the National Assembly itself.
Darren Miller.
So one of the problems with local development plans is that local authorities are constrained by the guidance issued by you and your Cabinet colleagues. And the big problem we've got up in Conway and Denbighshire, areas that I represent, is that the requirements to create lots of new housing are completely unsustainable in terms of the local infrastructure which is there. What are you doing to improve your guidance on the infrastructure that is going to be required to ensure that there are GP services, schools and roads and other community services available to those areas of new development which are going to be created?
Well, local authorities are responsible for that, and there are tools available for them. Of course, Section 106 enables them to look for community gain. They are able to see infrastructure develop, whether that's buildings such as schools or roads via Section 106. The community infrastructure levy, of course, soon to be devolved, is another way in which benefit can be drawn to a local community. It depends on how clever a local authority is willing to be, but it should never be the case that a major development takes place without any contribution by the developers to infrastructure, and that is something we would encourage local authorities to do.
Cwestiynau nawr gan arweinwyr y pleidiau, arweinydd Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch Llywydd. First Minister, Labour has led the Welsh Government for 17 years. Do you take responsibility for today's PISA results?
Well, the PISA results have seen some improvements in some areas, but disappointment in others. From our perspective, we want to see the journey continue, because if you believe the PISA tests are important, and I do believe they're important, then you have to recognise that the OECD itself has said that we are doing the right things and we are on the right journey. So it's a matter of making sure we continue with what we have been doing. Now, those are not my words, those are the words of the OECD. Nobody can be complacent. Nobody can accept the situation as it is. We've seen some improvements, but not enough. It's a matter now of staying the course as the OECD has advised us to do.
Well, that sounds pretty complacent to me, First Minister. And I think it says quite a lot that you won't take responsibility for the results that we've seen today. Now, the Labour government has predicted improvement. We've heard it all before. Last year, your Education Minister said a huge amount has happened since the disappointing 2012 test results. He also said, I would anticipate and I would hope for palpable improvement. So Labour has promised improvement and you've yet to deliver. First Minister, you yourself admitted that you've taken your eye off the ball when it comes to education. And the result is that today, Welsh scores for reading are worse than a decade ago. Welsh scores for maths are worse than a decade ago. Welsh scores for science are worse than a decade ago. Pupils, parents, teachers deserve the improvement that you said would happen. First Minister, when will we see improvement? And if you can answer that question, can you also tell us how can we believe you?
Look at the GCSE results, and you will see that those results have improved greatly since 2010, an improvement of only 10% in terms of those getting the right grades at GCSE. They are encouraging. We've seen an improvement in maths performance, disappointment with reading and with science. And so we are seeing the gap closing. We're confident that that gap will continue to close in the future because we see the results such as GCSEs and A-levels which are providing us with the evidence that the education system is moving in the right direction. But as I say, I think the Leader of the Opposition doesn't have to believe what I say, but if she accepts, as I said, that the PISA tests are important, and she does, of course, then she must accept that the OECD who set those tests are saying to us that we are moving in the right direction and we should stay on course. What they are absolutely clear about is that we should not suddenly have wild reform or widespread reform now, but rather that the direction is correct. If she has other alternatives, which she wants to put forward, that's a matter for her. But we listen to the OECD. We see that there is great room for improvement. We accept that. But we do listen to what the OECD says in terms of them saying to us that we are on the right track.
First Minister, you are the government. You are the ones who have promised improvement. And the reason that I ask you about those improvements is that you've got a record of moving the goalposts on this. You are the ones who have chosen to fully participate in PISA and to use it as a credible benchmark. In October 2014, the target of reaching the top 20 in the world by 2016 was dropped. Labour brought in a new target at that point to reach the average of 500 points for reading, maths and science by 2021. Can you tell us now, are you still committed to that, or are you going to move the goalposts again?
I am confident that when the next PISA results come that we will see more improvement. The reason why I say that is because I mentioned the GCSE and A-level results. We're seeing the first of that improvement in maths. We're seeing the gap closing in areas such as reading and in science, but not good enough, not good enough. There's still work to be done. We do know that in other countries where improvements were affected, those improvements do take years, that improvements cannot be turned around within 3 years. And yes, of course we take responsibility. We were the government who actually went into PISA in the first place. And we must accept that PISA is a way on which the education system of Wales will be measured. There is more work to be done. The Education Secretary will be outlining that in more detail as she makes her statement. We are seeing improvements in some areas, but no, things are not as they should be, and we'll never be content. We'll always want to see improvement in the Welsh education system, and that is exactly what we wish to see, and we will do.
Arweinydd y Ceidwadwyr Cymraeg, Andrew Watty.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, if I can take forward the points on PISA again, and it was notable in your responses to the Leader of Plaid Cymru, not one backbencher behind you had the wit to listen to you. All of them were looking at their computers, and rightly so. The Labour Party need to be embarrassed by today's results after 17 years of leading education here in Wales. That is a damning indictment on your failure as First Minister and the Labour Party's ability to lead education here in Wales. When you took office as First Minister nearly 7 years ago, I think the anniversary is this Saturday, you rightly pointed out that education was a cornerstone of your policy positioning as First Minister, and you rightly point to the proud heritage that you have of being the son of 2 teachers. Now, you also pointed out that education was the key to unlocking success for the Welsh economy. Why on earth hasn't that key turned to the benefit of pupils in Wales when you look at the PISA results today?
Well, I've already given detailed answers to the Leader of Plaid Cymru and accepted that there is no room for complacency and there's much room for improvement. But I have to say, when I went to school in the 1980s, the schools were awful. The buildings were awful. We had no library, it was falling apart. The buildings, if the windows were broken, they remained broken. The standard of teaching was good. We were lucky to have good teachers, but that is the reality of it. For those of us who went to a comprehensive, those of us who remember it as it was under the Tories. Now, let's examine his party's education policy.
Okay, let's quieten down.
Let's examine his party's education policy, if indeed there is one. Hands up anybody who knows what the Tory education policy is beyond cutting funding for schools. They stood on the basis of cutting education funding by 20%. They're still saying that schools' funding should be cut. Now, we accept there is work to do when it comes to improving education. What we will never accept is that schools should have less money, which is exactly what he advocates.
For goodness sake, First Minister, show some humility, for goodness sake. Referring back to the 80s, referring to policies. You're in government. You're the First Minister. Right. The Labour Party have been in government since 1999. You've written off a generation. Are you prepared to write off another generation? It's your own education secretaries who have come to this chamber time and time again. Hugh Lewis, back in 2013, said, "I expect to see the impact of our reforms reflected in the next set of results." These are the set of results we're looking at today. What has happened in reading? What has happened in science? And we're still behind the figures in maths from 2006. So why can we not unreasonably expect from you to show some leadership? You have a new mandate. I congratulate you on that mandate. But what we can't put up with is more of the same, so we write off another generation. Give us some vision, First Minister. You've got the keys, unlock the door.
The clanging of an empty vessel, I have to say. But he asks a question about vision. Let me say to him, let me repeat to him what I said to the leader of Plaid Cymru. And it's this. The OECD have said the last thing we should be doing is having a wholesale change in education policy. That's exactly what they've said. They have said we are on the right track. What he is advocating is throw everything up into the air, have complete disruption, which might be justified, If the OECD said to us, you're on the wrong track, he might well be right. But that's not what they say. What the OECD have said, you are moving in the right direction, stick at it, and that's exactly what we mean to do. We are seeing those improvements, we've seen it in maths, we are seeing it in GCSEs and A-levels, and we will continue to see it in the years to come.
Well, with respect, you just need to look what's gone on in Scotland with the results today when you're looking at some of the changes that have gone on in other parts of the United Kingdom. But I am holding you to account about the vision that you obviously do not have for education in the future. I have quoted Hugh Lewis, who was the previous Cabinet Secretary. Someone we do miss from this chamber is the dear old Leighton Andrews from the Rhondda, who I congratulate the member for the Rhondda who lost his seat to. But ultimately, at least he had a go. And he told us in 2010, he said to us in 2010, honesty, leadership and a new approach to accountability was what was required. He wanted, by this stage in the cycle, not 2 years ago, but in 2010, for the Welsh Government to have got Wales into the top 20. Now, that was dropped, as we've heard earlier from questionings, that you wanted to hit the 500 mark, you did. Now, you said you were confident that you were going to hit the 500 mark next time round. We haven't heard anything to give us confidence that we won't be in the same place in 3 years' time for you today. Why on earth can you not give us some hard and fast commitments here today where we will be in 3 years' time when PISA does its next set of tests, so that at least we can mark the scorecard then, First Minister, and actually not have the same old excuses coming out from Cabinet Secretaries and First Ministers standing here blaming everyone else and not taking a long, hard look in the mirror and wondering why it's all gone wrong.
As I say to the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, he cannot say on the one hand that the PISA tests are robust, and I agree with him on that, but on the other hand say that the OECD advice that we've had should be ignored, which is what he's saying. And he is saying exactly that. The OECD have said that we are on the right track and we should continue on the track that we're on. He cannot ignore that and pretend that hasn't been said, because it has. Now, I've listened carefully to him and his party over the years in terms of their policies. I know nothing about what their education policy is, beyond cutting schools' funding and having a dalliance with grammar schools, which is exactly what the OECD have said shouldn't happen. So, yes, it is uncomfortable reading. I don't deny it. It is a sign that we can never be complacent. I agree. It is a sign that there is still work to be done, although there are some signs of improvement. Not good enough. There's still more to do. What we will not do, however, is panic, throw everything up in the air, when we know that the advice that we have had says that we should stay on the track that we are on. That is what the OECD have said. Now, if we're prepared to disagree with the OECD and chuck their advice in the bin when they're the very people who set these tests up, then that is a matter for him. But it is not something that we will do as a government. We will continue to see improvements in GCSEs, improvements in A-levels, and move towards better figures for PISA next time round.
Arweinydd grŵp UKIP, Neil Hamilton.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Llywydd. Since last Tuesday, I've had the advantage of reading the government's printed case in the Supreme Court case, which is being heard today. And apart from what it says at the beginning, that the result of the referendum to leave the EU should be respected, it completely ignores the fact that the British people, by majority, gave a government a mandate to trigger Article 50. And that mandate from the British people includes 26 of the 29 seats that Labour won in the election in May for this Assembly. although fine words at the start of this case say that the referendum result should be respected, the rest of the government's case is an obstacle in the way of respecting that result.
Well, I am not a Supreme Court Justice, and he, thank the Lord, is not a lawyer. And so we'll have to wait and see whether his submissions are correct or whether those of the Welsh Government are correct.
Well, the First Minister is misinformed because I am a member of the bar, as is he. But there you go. That's not the first time that the First Minister has displayed his ignorance in this chamber. But in the last 10 years, the Parliament at Westminster,
Allow the member to be heard, please. I'd like to hear the question.
In the last 10 years, the Parliament at Westminster has passed two very important acts to restrict the government's powers in respect of the prerogative in relation to European Union legislation, the 2008 European Union Amendment Act and the 2011 European Union Act, which provides that in certain circumstances the government should not take any decisions without a resolution or an act of the House of Commons or an act of Parliament or a referendum. In none of those acts does it refer to Article 50. Therefore, the prerogative powers of the Crown were not intended to be restricted by Parliament in this respect. And the Welsh Government's attempt to frustrate the expressed wish of the British people in a referendum where 17.5 million people voted to leave the EU is absolutely disgraceful.
Before the First Minister answers, could I tell all Cabinet Secretaries, especially the one I'm looking at, that the First Minister does not need any support from the Cabinet bench? Or I don't think he needs any support. First Minister.
Well, unless the member is registered as a practising barrister, he's not a lawyer. I'm not, and nor is he. I've been in court since 2000, January 2000. But there we are. But he's making a case that he should make the Supreme Court, not to me. And we shall wait and see what the Supreme Court does. I mean, I did notice that his former party leader, he of the misspelling of a constituency yesterday, of course, famously on TV, threatened to lead a march of 100,000 people to the Supreme Court yesterday. That didn't happen. And rightly so, because it's only right that judges should be able to make up their own minds without ridiculous pressure being applied on them by the media and by politicians. This is the most important constitutional case, as the Counsel General has put it to me, since Charles I, although hopefully without the same outcome for anybody involved. There are important issues here, not just a prerogative, but in terms of what this means for the Welsh and Scottish legislatures and for Northern Ireland, particularly there with the border issues there. And these are issues that must be resolved as a matter of law. This is not something that's going to stop the referendum result from happening. That clearly will happen, but it has to be done, surely, in a lawful way.
Yes, I entirely agree. But the Welsh Government has intervened in this Supreme Court case in order to attempt to frustrate the wishes of the British people as freely expressed in a referendum. Otherwise, there would be no point in intervening in the case in the first place, because the First Minister has said many times that Labour will respect the result of the referendum, and therefore Labour MPs will or ought not to be whipped to vote against triggering Article 50. Well, if Labour MPs are not to vote against Article 50, what on earth is the point of the case in the first place?
Well, I'm not actually the leader of the opposition at Westminster. The principle is this, that we have taken the view that there are issues regarding Article 50 that would affect the powers of this place. Yeah, and as a result, it's hugely important, therefore, that the situation of the people of Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland is examined so we know constitutionally what the process should be. We would not accept a situation where the prerogative would be used to reduce the powers of this Assembly. And that's why it's important that the Supreme Court actually examines these issues to make sure that what is done, but is done legally, surely. Brexit was not a vote about ignoring courts or the law. We were told it was about empowering the UK Parliament, except when it's inconvenient. Now, let the Supreme Court do its work. Let it examine these issues in detail, and then we will have the answer that is needed before the process then moves on, as inevitably it will.
Question 3, Leanne Wood.
Diolch, Llywydd. What initiatives are the Welsh Government working on to tackle climate change?
Yes, I described in our climate change strategy. We are now developing further interventions that work towards our long-term target of an 80% emissions reduction by 2050, while maximising economic, social and cultural benefits to Wales.
7 years ago, First Minister, the One Wales Government laid out plans to achieve self-sufficiency with energy generation within 20 years. Now, 1/3 of that time frame has already passed, and you're still way off target, lagging way behind Scotland when it comes to generating energy from renewable sources. According to an Energy Trends report from September of this year, Scotland generates 4 times more renewable energy than we do here in Wales. First Minister, what has happened to your ambition on renewable energy and tackling climate change? Are you still aiming for that self-sufficiency?
Yes, the Scots had an advantage over us, which will no longer be there in 2018, where they control the consenting process for major energy projects, which we didn't. And that was a major difficulty for us. Nothing over 50 megawatts on land, nothing over 1 megawatt in the sea. Now, in the North Sea, of course, the Scots have been successful in terms of developing offshore wind in a way that we had no control over. And so we were not able to develop, even though we have places like Gwyntamore, to develop renewable energy in the way that we would want to. But with 2018 and the new powers that will come to this place, that will then give us the opportunity to catch up with Scotland. And Scotland, indeed, were further ahead than us because of the powers that they inherited back in 1999, including the powers they actually had over the grid, which is not something that we had and will have in the future.
Jeremy Miles.
Diolch, Llywydd. I note from the First Minister's response that he will regard our capacity to generate green energy from the sea as a significant asset in tackling climate change for Wales as a tidal nation. As we await the decision of the Westminster Government in relation to the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon and welcome the first ever large-scale tidal energy farm off the coast of the Orkneys, does he join me in hoping that the remaining regulatory steps to be taken in Wales to proceed with the lagoon can be taken quickly so we preserve our first mover advantage? And will he agree to keep under review the 2011 Marine Renewable Energy Framework to make sure it keeps pace with technological and other change in the sector?
Absolutely. We're well placed to take advantage of tidal energy particularly. We know that the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon could create an estimated 1,900 jobs during construction and beyond. It is hugely important now that the UK government makes that step of ensuring that what will be an energy source that will last 100 years or more will actually come into being, and we can generate more energy more cheaply over 100 years in terms of looking at it in that way, but also, of course, in a much cleaner and greener way.
Susie Davis.
Diolch, Llywydd. Last week it was announced that Swansea is number 13 in a list of the UK's most congested towns and cities, and that apparently results in a drop in the city's productivity as well as polluting the air. 3 years ago, Swansea Council installed their Nowcaster system to monitor air pollution levels, identify poor air quality and redirect traffic. It's still not ready, despite the Welsh Government committing £100,000 of its money to that system. In aiming to tackle climate change, how will you collect carbon emissions data? How will you use that data? And then how will you take to task any partners that you rely upon to help you get that data if they don't come up with the goods?
Well, data was collected via a number of organisations, but NRW, of course, being one of them, so we're able to understand what particulate levels are in some parts of Wales, the levels not just of PM10s but PM2.5s. We know that with traffic, if traffic is idling, then that creates worse air quality. Bryn-Glas-Tunnels is an example of that. We know that Swansea has challenges in the sense that its rail network disappeared pretty much in the 1960s. It was never as integrated as that of Cardiff. Nevertheless, there are plans moving forward now for a Swansea Bay metro, which will do much in terms of enabling people to get out of their cars and therefore improve air quality.
David Rowlands.
Diolch, Llywydd. Would the First Minister agree that rather than spending tens of millions of pounds on wind turbines, which are said to be only around 35% efficient, and environmentally damaging and cost the very poorest in the country in increased energy costs, whilst incidentally putting large amounts of money into wealthy landowners' pockets, it would be better to spend the money on home improvements such as insulation, double glazing and new boiler installation, which would not only be more efficient at cutting environmental pollution, but would also positively benefit the poor in society.
That was a cheap shot with the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, I thought. The member's not aware, I know, but it is Christmas after all. The reality is that there's no point in simply providing people with the means to make their homes more energy efficient. Yes, that's important, but it's not enough of itself. It's hugely important that we continue to access energy reserves, that have a mixture of energy. The member's right to say you can't have everything done by wind power, but they certainly have a role to play, and they do in many, many economies around the world. He mentions being environmentally damaging. I mean, coal-fired power stations and the coal that is won to feed them, that is done in a very environmentally damaging way, and communities who live next door to open cast sites have something very strong to say about that. The reality is that everybody wants the lights to come on. That means we have to have means of generating power. Wind is free. The infrastructure has to be built, that's true. The tide will always be there as long as the moon is there. It makes absolute sense to me to harness these sources of power. They're not just clean and green, but actually in the longer term, much cheaper.
Cwestiwn 4, Steffan Lewis.
First Minister, make a statement on community cohesion.
Yes, our community cohesion strategy was launched in 2009 and was recently updated. Its delivery is supported across Wales by 8 regional community cohesion coordinators based in local authorities, and funding to continue this work in 2017 to 18 was approved last month by the Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Last week, the Member of Parliament for Aberavon said we must move away from multiculturalism and towards assimilation. We must stand for one group, the British people. Will the First Minister condemn these comments in no uncertain terms, and will he reassure this Assembly that such views are not representative of Welsh Government policy, and will he join me in celebrating the rich diversity of this country?
I didn't hear the comments, if I'm honest, but what I can say is that there has never been an occasion ever in the history of this island where there's been one culture, ever. It's always been a multicultural island, whether it's in terms of religion, whether it's in terms of linguistic diversity, whether it's in terms of the colour of people's skin. The reality is that there have been people with black skin on these islands since the 3rd century. It's a myth to think that this is something new. It's always been the case that Britain has been multicultural, and that is something we should celebrate and not be afraid of.
Rhiannon Passmore.
In the Welsh Government's Community Cohesion National Delivery Plan 16-17, the then Minister Lesley Griffiths for Communities and Tackling Poverty stated, "We are moving to a new climate where Wales of cohesive communities is enshrined in the national goals for our Wellbeing of Future Generation Wales Act 2015, and this will ensure cohesion remains at the heart of how public bodies deliver policies and services in the future." Will the First Minister outline how the Welsh Government currently sees the state of community cohesion in Wales, and what future actions can be taken to enhance it further?
Again, to the answer I gave earlier in terms of the community cohesion plan and, of course, the work of the regional coordinators in making sure that plan moves ahead. We know that there have been challenges in the aftermath of Brexit, where in some communities there has been an increase in hate crime, but it's something I hope is temporary and not something clearly that provides us with a worrying trend for the future. And we know that cohesive communities are happier communities. And when people are in conflict with each other, then their lives are better as a result of it. And we continue to make sure that what we do in terms of promoting community cohesion helps to raise people's sense of well-being, falling in line as well with the course of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act.
Mark Isherwood.
Although the Future Generations Commissioner has said the aim is to make public bodies think more about the long term, work better with people, with communities and each other, and seek to prevent problems occurring, tackle common issues by taking a more joined up approach, something also reflected in duties required under the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, too many local authorities are still interpreting this as a hierarchical, we decide first and then consult requirement. How will you therefore finally work with the brilliant All Wales co-production network for Wales, which is on the ground delivering projects on this basis, enabling professionals and citizens to share power and work together in equal partnership, and also one of the organisations, Oxfam Cymru specifically, which has called on your government to embed the sustainable livelihoods approach in all policy and service delivery in Wales, helping people identify their own strengths in order to tackle root problems preventing them and their communities from reaching their potential.
Community cohesion can't be imposed. It has to grow organically from grassroots in order for it to be sustainable and robust. And so I would expect local authorities to work in genuine partnership with organisations who have experience of delivering on the ground in order to make sure that cohesion is robust within the communities that local authorities serve.
Cwestiwn 5, Simon Thomas.
Hwnnw y Prif Weinidog ddatganiad am bolisi amaeth Llywodraeth Cymru yn sgil y penderfyniad I adael yr undeb Ewropeaidd.
Mae Ameth yn ddiwydiant ac hefyd yn ddiwylliant, byddwn ni'n gweud allweddol I Gymru o ran y bwyd mae'n gynhyrchu y cyfraniad economaidd, mae'n wneud ar bydd cyhoeddus ehangach sy'n deillio o honno yn dilyn y referendum. Ni wedi bod yn wrthi'n cynnal trafodaethau a rhan ddeiliad ynglyn â'r weledigaeth i'r dyfodol ar gyfer y maes hwn.
Diolch Prif Weinidog, a wy'n cytuno bod amaeth yn aml iawn yn diwylliant gymaint ac yn diwydiant ac yn cynnal ein diwylliant ni, ond mae'n amlwg erbyn hyn bod yna rai sy'n eleniaethau sy'n ddatganoli yn defnyddio y cyfle mae penderfyniad I adael yr undeb Ewropeaidd fel ffordd o datcloi drwy drws cefn y broses datganoli sydd wedi rhoi y pwerau dros amaeth a'r amgylchedd gyda ni fan hyn yn y cynulliad. Ac wrth gwrs arweinydd y ceidwadwyr yma yn y siambr yn ymffodus yn un o'r rhaina. Newch chi felly, Prif Weinidog, ymuno gyda Plaid Cymru a gyda unrhyw un arall yn y siambr sydd am wneud hyn, mewn ymgyrch a draws y pleidiau, gyda mudiadau cefn gwlad, gyda'r undebau ffermwyr, I sicrhau beth bynnag y ddaw yn sgil adael yr undeb Ewropeaidd, ni fyddwn ni'n colli un pwer dros yr amaeth na dros cefn gwlad Cymru.
Wel, wedi gweud o'r dechrau, wrth gwrs, bod amaeth wedi cael ei ddatganoli. Nid cyfle yw hwn I dynnu pwerau oddi wrth bobl Cymru, dim o gwbl. Falle mae yna achos I ystyried rai pethau, fel wedi gweud o'r blaen iechyd anifeiliaid, I gael rhyw fath o bolisi sydd ar draws Prydain Fawr, ond dim ond trwy cytuno. A nid bod San Steffan yn gweud hwn sy'n mynd I ddigwydd ar yr ynys hyn a does dim dewis dy chi yng Nghymru na'r Alban. So felly cytundeb yw'r sy'n bwysig fan hyn a nid dim byd arall. A falle bydde werth siarad am rhyw fath o fframwaith eitha llac ond cyffredinol, ond siarad a chytuno sy'n holl bwysig I hwn. Na, dyw hwn ddim yn cyfle I dynnu pwerau oddi wrth ffermwyr Cymru, Llywodraeth Cymru na pobl Cymru.
Russell George.
You'll no doubt be aware, First Minister, there are administration issues for farmers who have land that straddle the Welsh English border in terms of the basic payment scheme, which each year leads to payments being delayed. Now, European rules concerning cross-border claimants require each single payment agency, England and Wales, to have a separate agency. Do you feel that there, as a result of the the UK leaving the EU, there is an opportunity here to find a system that can resolve the issue, because clearly this is a significant issue for many farmers in Montgomeryshire?
Well, this would mean, of course, the Welsh Government taking over payments for farmers in England, because we are far superior as a payments agency and have been for many, many years in terms of payment, in terms of speed of payment. And the last thing Welsh farmers, I suspect, would want is the RPA involved in delivering farming subsidies in Wales. There have been issues of cross-border farms. He is right. The reason for that is because the RPA have been slow in delivering data to us. Now, there are better ways of doing things, that much is true, but I think it would send a chill down the spine to most Welsh farmers if they found they would have to face the same delays as their colleagues have faced in England.
Neil Hamilton.
Well, will the First Minister agree with me that leaving the European Union gives us a great opportunity in Wales to fashion agricultural policy according to our own needs. And UKIP will play its full part in helping the Welsh Government to develop such a policy, which makes it all the more incomprehensible that the Government should be pursuing the line in the Supreme Court today, that the powers of this Assembly are in some way going to be diminished. As a result of leaving the EU, we'll get more power in the Assembly, not less. This is something that we should be looking forward to and welcoming, not trying to frustrate and prevent.
Of course, now whether he is ploughing his own furrow on that, to use the term he'd be familiar with, or whether he is speaking as a kind of proxy for the UK government, only he knows. But he has said that he thinks this is an opportunity to remove powers from the people of Wales and indeed from the Welsh Government, a view that is not shared by the farming unions. He's been pretty much hosted by his own petard in that regard. Now, the one issue, and the farming unions identified this correctly this morning, about that we need to get absolutely right, is access to the single market. They know full well how much of a disaster it would be if they cannot sell in that market on the same terms. The difficulty is, when it comes to free trade agreements, agriculture is almost always omitted. Countries are very protective of their agriculture. We know that WTO rules, if they were imposed on agriculture, would mean a 70% tariff on Welsh land going into Europe. Now, Welsh farming cannot withstand that kind of tariff. And so I take him at his word, but I have to say to him that what is absolutely vital for the future, well, there are two things that are vital for the future of Welsh farming: a certainty over subsidies post-2020, and a fair division of the money, not a Barnett share, otherwise we would be 75% down from where we are now. And secondly, the ability to sell in Welsh farming's major market, which is the European Union. So any kind of barrier that if Welsh farmers face that barrier in terms of selling to Europe would be, and I choose my word quite deliberately here, disastrous for Welsh farming, which is why full and unfettered access to the single market has to be the defining principle for any UK government in its negotiations with the EU.
Cwestiwn 6, Gareth Bennett.
Will the First Minister provide an update on funding for the South Wales Metro?
Yes, the Phase 2 project of the Metro has been estimated at £734 million. The final cost will be determined during the procurement negotiations, and that funding does include match funding from the European Regional Development Fund, which we expect the UK government to honour in terms of providing this funding.
Yes, thanks, First Minister. I'm glad you referred to the pledge by the UK government to match the funding. Paul Maynard, the UK's Transport Minister, he specifically advised the Welsh Government to apply for the ERDF funding. So would you agree that the Brexit vote is not necessarily any impediment to going ahead with the South Wales Metro project?
Not to going ahead with it, but in terms of its scope, yes, potentially it will reduce its scope. If the European funding element of £125 million is not made up by the UK government, then clearly the Metro cannot go ahead at the same speed and in terms of the same ambition as it otherwise would have done. So yes, I mean, there is a £125 million gap that the UK government has to make up. Otherwise, the Metro project cannot be as ambitious as we would want it to be, although clearly it can move forward, but not in quite the way that we would have wanted.
Cwestiwn 7, Hugh Ranker Davies.
Will the First Minister provide an update on ambulance service performance in South Wales?
Well, ambulance performance across Wales since the introduction of the clinical response model pilot has been extremely positive, exceeding the target in every month in the first year, the national target that is, in every month in the first year of the pilot.
I welcome that news, and it is extremely positive. It's vitally important to my constituents because the response time for those that are life-threatening issues makes clearly a major difference to their lives, but also to their families as well, knowing that they have that reassurance that an ambulance will there be on a red call will be there in due time. It's noticeable, however, that we still have this ongoing problem in England, Wales and Northern Ireland with the wastage of time of ambulances at A&E units. It's not unique to Wales, and it's been long and enduring. I think the same Freedom of Information request suggested that over 500,000 hours within the UK were actually wasted. And of course, these are ambulances that could be out doing the good work that they need to do very efficiently. I wonder what can he say in terms of how we address this issue, not only now as the winter pressures also come on top of us, but in years to come as well. Tremendous inroads that we've done into the red call response times, but how do we actually deal with those wasted hours that are sitting there outside A&E? And it's not just a Wales issue. How do we do this right across all the different nations as well?
There are several ways of doing it. One, of course, is to make sure that people are properly assessed when they arrive in terms of where they go for treatment. Making sure, of course, that ambulances are able to get away as quickly as possible. And that means, of course, focusing A&E on, in particular, centres across Wales who are able to provide a certain degree of specialisation. That's been difficult, but nevertheless we know that it provides people with a better outcome. But I would say that we see the improvement in terms of ambulance waiting times at A&E through the response times to the most immediately life-threatening calls. The fact that more and more of these calls are being got to within the time allocated is a sign that ambulances are getting away more quickly. As a general rule, from A&E departments, yes, there will be some pressures now and again on some dates where a larger number of people than expected do come through, but he's right. If we look at the most immediately life-threatening calls, response time in Northern Ireland, 51.2%. In England, around about 65%, Scotland 66.4%, Wales 79.5%, and that's a tribute to the paramedics that we have in Wales and indeed the Wales Ambulance Trust.
Cwestiwn 8, Paul Davies.
Wnaeth y Prif Weinidog ddatganiad am yr hyn y mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn ymwneud i gefnogi ffermwyr yn Sir Benfro.
O'n i'n gweithio i gynorthwyo'r diwydiant ffermio yn Sir Benfro fel ym mhob ran o Gymru i sicrhau bod y diwydiant yn gallu gwneud mwy o elw, yn fwy canoliadwy a gallu bod yn fwy cadarn.
Prif Weinidog, mae ffermwyr yn Sir Benfro yn poeni'n enfawr ynghylch cynigion eich Llywodraeth chi gyflwyno parthau perygl nitrade yng Nghymru, oherwydd fydd hyn yn heriol yn ariannol i ffermwyr i gyd yn ffurfio ag unrhyw reoliadau newydd sydd yn cael eu cynnig yn yr ymgynghoriad. Felly, o ystyried eich sylwadau ym mis Gorffennaf bod i lan i Lywodraeth Cymru nawr i benderfynu pa gyfreithiau dylid cael eu cadw neu fydd ddim yn cael eu cadw yn dilyn penderfyniad Prydain i adael yr Undeb Ewropeaidd. Allech chi egluro pam mae Llywodraeth Cymru wedi bwrw ymlaen ar ymgynghoriad yma i gyflwyno parthau perygl nitrade sydd o ganlyniad i gyfarwyddeb Ewropeaidd, oherwydd fydd cyflwyno rheoliadau fel hyn yn sicr yn gadael ffermwyr yn fy etholaeth i o dan yn fantes enfawr.
Mae carffosaeth nitrous yn broblem mewn rai rannau o Gymru. Does dim osgoi hwnna, mae rhaid i ni ddelio dy hwn o achos yr effaith negyddol mae hwn yn cael ar yr amgylchedd. Nawr, mae'n bwysig dros ben i wrando, ni'n deall hynny, mae'r ymgynghoriad ar agor tan y tolig, ond fe gwrddodd, fe oedd yna gyfarfod rhwng swyddogion a hefyd cynrychiolwyr o'r undebau a ffermwyr mis Hydref i ddelio gyda'r materion hyn. Oedd cyfarfod hynny yn un positif, a'r ffermwyr hunain moyn sicrhau bod nhw'n ystyried ffyrdd i sicrhau bod llai o nitrous yn mynd mewn i'r dŵr a eisiau gweithio, felly gyda'i gilydd a gyda Llywodraeth mwyn sicrhau bod nhw'n ddim yn digwydd yn y pen draw.
Ac yn ola cwestiwn 9, Len Neigl.
First Minister make a statement on the additional capital monies the Welsh Government will receive following the announcement in the UK Government's autumn statement?
Yes, despite the £442 million additional capital, the capital budget will still be 21% lower in 2019 to 20 than in 2009 to 10.
The Welsh Government has done its utmost to protect public services in the face of Tory cuts from Westminster, but continued austerity has inevitably meant that difficult choices have had to be made, and there has been a significant reduction in the budget for the Community Facilities and Activities programme. I know that many community groups in Wales find this an invaluable source of funding, and Cwmbran Centre for Young People in my constituency, which does a sterling job, has recently submitted a bid only to find that the future of the programme is in doubt. In the light of the additional capital monies, will you discuss this with Cabinet colleagues with a view to ensuring that we can try and continue this invaluable lifeline for community groups in Wales?
Could I thank the member, my colleague, for that question. This is one issue amongst many that we're considering as a government in terms of how we allocate new monies. In terms of the community facilities programme, there's not been an evaluation yet. It's still quite early in the life of the programme, but monitoring visits carried out to completed projects indicate that the facilities are well used and sustainable into the future. There are difficult choices as to what we do with future finances. And I think it's probably fair to say that only the very best applications can expect to attract CFP funding in the future. And we will see what can be made available during the course of discussions that we have in terms of dealing with any extra resources we get from the UK Government.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog.